50 minutes.
Thank you, Sarah. My name is Pravesh and I'm an alcoholic. And it is definitely by the grace of God that I'm sober just for today. I want to thank the Shivering speakers for asking me to share here with you this evening. It is indeed a privilege and an honor. And Sarah, you may have heard me a number of occasions, but that was just for 3 minutes. You should come closer and hear my heart beat or feel how fast it's racing. It's a kind of nervousness that I haven't overcome in all these days in Alcoholics Anonymous. But what a pleasure it is to be here and to celebrate this milestone. The denizens have become family to me. I found the meeting through my friend Saul, who's introduced me to this meeting. And she shared at the morning meeting, and then that afternoon I jumped onto the steps meeting and I haven't turned back. And that meeting has been phenomenal and great recovery. And thank you so much for adding value to my life. So my voice will be a little croaky because I'm still a little nervous, but hopefully it will work itself out by the end of the meeting when it's your turn to comment. My being at this meeting today, or any meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, is my appointment with God. I found God in these rooms and I found God through you people. And I want to apologize if there's someone that may not have my conception or perception of God. But for me, it's all gratitude to the God of my understanding for my being in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so when I come here, I don't want God to be disappointed with what he sees. I don't want him to scratch his head and I say that I should have given it to the guy behind Pravesh or the guy in front of Pravesh. It is by his grace that I'm sober. And of course, he's certainly going to wonder if I had squandered this gift that he had given to me. And, sobriety doesn't only, it comes with a responsibility. And Dr. Silkworth at the end of his letter, he states that you may rely absolutely about what these people have to say about themselves. And he's talking about me, a drunk, someone that society wanted to kick out. And he is telling the people that are reading this book that you can rely absolutely on what Pravesh has to say about himself. And immediately it places the responsibility of honesty on me. And, for you to depend absolutely on what I have to say, it has to be something of substance, something of weight. But much of what I'm going to say this evening and much of what I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, someone else knew before me. And it is through these meetings and interaction with people like you that I've come to learn and I've come to believe. So I come here not seeking self-satisfaction, but I come here with a deep sense of gratitude for God, to Alcoholics Anonymous, the program of recovery, and wonderful friends that I've found in Alcoholics Anonymous that have helped me to stay sober, through these years. 30 years of being in Alcoholics Anonymous was no different this morning. It didn't give me any kind of immunity against that first drink. I suffer from an illness, and every day I wake up with untreated alcoholism. And every day is the day that I have to treat it. And so it doesn't matter what I did in the last 29 years and 364 days. It's what I do today that would keep me sober. So my first decision this morning was the decision to stay sober. And even though it may be the 30th anniversary, I am still powerless over alcohol. I still cannot manage my life on my own. And so I had to do what I needed to do in order for me to stay sober today, in order for me not to pick up that first drink. There is a slight difference, however. 29 years ago, when I went down on my knees and I prayed and I asked God to keep me sober, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what I was in for. I didn't know what life was going to be like. Today, when I went down on my knees and I asked God to keep me sober, I knew exactly what I would lose if I didn't stay sober. And it is through coming to Alcoholics Anonymous that, your losses become your gains and ignorance becomes knowledge. And so today, I come to Alcoholics Anonymous not because I'm scared of getting drunk, not because I got a marker register, but I go to as many meetings as I can, because I need as many meetings to give back what was so freely given to me. And I want to pay tribute to my dad, my late dad, who was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, who carried this message to me. And he carried this message to me when I was a college graduate, a secondary school teacher, and he had only 2 years of formal education. And he carried the message of Alcoholics Anonymous to me. So this illness of alcoholism is not only for the degraded, it's also for the degreed. And you know, it doesn't require any kind of formal education. It requires an acceptance. It requires a belief. It requires a few basic principles that allows me to stay sober. But you know, I come from an alcoholic home. I grew up in an alcoholic home, and I was always wanting what the other side had. When I looked over the fence, my neighbors seemed to have better stuff than us. Their toys were always better. Their parents spoke to them better. When I visited my friends, and I saw their parents sit around the dinner table or the coffee table and talk lovingly to them, I thought something was wrong. Because those things I didn't grow up with. You know, my mom was emotionally absent. She was affected by my dad's drinking. She was affected by her dad's drinking, and then obviously by mine. And so, you know, growing up as a kid, when we used to get home from school, my mom used to have a few slices of buttered bread for us and a cup of tea for my sister and I. And you know, when I got home, before I started to have that tea and buttered bread, I would always ask my mom, you know, are you still angry with dad? And she would always tell me no. But the manner in which she told me no, I knew that she was still angry at him. And so I didn't enjoy this bread because, you know, the drama of the previous night, the thoughts of the fight at school, etc. And, you know, the next day was the same, and the next day was the same. And by Thursday, that anger would have subsided. And, you know, I would enjoy that buttered bread and tea. And guess what? It's Friday, and the drama of the alcoholic home repeats itself. And you know, I knew it was going to be another weekend of drama, another weekend of vulgarities and all of these things. And I grew up with that. And, you know, I loved my dad. And I didn't think that there was anything wrong with him. I just thought that my mom just interfered with his drinking. And I picked up my first drink at the age of 13. And these guys that invited me to the first drink were giving me a farewell party. We were moving home from the area that we were living in. And they didn't buy, they bought half a bottle of alcohol, and we went and a packet of cigarettes and some soda to go with it. And you know, once that alcohol was finished, the guy said, that's it. And, you know, party is over. But it wasn't over for me. On the first day that I drank, I needed more alcohol. And I went and I got more alcohol. 40 or 50 years down the line, I meet these guys. They can still have a few drinks and say party is over and go home. And sometimes if we're having a meal and these guys are having a beer or whatever it is, and they can ignore that beer and they can actually take a bite of their meal. They can leave that beer on the table and they can take a walk and they can have a conversation with friends. And that beer troubles me. How could you do that to alcohol? And this I'm talking about in sobriety. You know, I couldn't understand. And I used to tell these guys, you know, you people give drinking a bad name. and you know, at that point in time, if I had known that, you know, this was going to take me down a path of degradation, misery, humiliation, and the whole lot of negativities that I associated with, I would have probably not gone on further. But there was one important thing that I wasn't aware of, and I only got to know about it in Alcoholics Anonymous, and that when it comes to alcohol, I'm bodily and mentally different from other people. And it took me a long time to understand that. And so, you know, life had started to become unmanageable. Career choices had changed. I ended up doing something that I really didn't want to do. But, you know, as my drinking progressed in me in my early days, the goalposts started to shift. and my ambitions, diminished, and important aspects of my life were relegated. They became secondary issues, and I scraped by, just making it with little success in whatever I set out to do. When I qualified as a teacher, I thought that I would be placed with responsibilities, and I used that as a signpost in my life to say that, this is where maybe I would make the change. And I wanted to make that change at that point in time. And when I got to that point in time, I wasn't even 21 years old when I qualified. And I said, okay, when I turn 21, then I'll make that change. And then I moved it to 25. And all along, though the desire was there, I didn't realize that, unless something in me, and how was I to know about it? Because I didn't know anything about this. I didn't even know that I was suffering from an illness. And, I just thought that it was normal for people to, like me, to drink. Driving under the influence of alcohol, license being endorsed, suspended sentence, time in jail, a whole lot of drugs in my life. Life had become unmanageable. Resigning from a job, geographical changes, all of these things were not powerful enough for me to stop drinking. Such was my powerlessness. I remember I resigned from the teaching profession, and then I went and I reapplied, and I was sent to a school. And when I got to the school, I introduced myself to the principal. And remember, I made all of the promises that I'm going to pitch up to school regularly. I'm going to mark the books. I'm going to be ready for the tests, etc. And I get to the school and I introduced myself to the principal. And he greeted me, he obviously introduced himself. And the first question he asked me was, do you drink? Now, I don't know if he smelled the alcohol of the previous night or he could see alcoholism on me, but he could have asked me any number of questions. But he asked me, I drank. Of course, I developed a resentment towards that guy because how could he? He could have asked me any number of questions. And so he asked me to go and familiarize myself with the staff and, get to know them. And I get to about 1 meter away from a guy that was standing on the sports field whom I'd never met in my life. And as I get to him, he tells me they're only sending alcoholics to the school. And this was someone I didn't know. And my reputation had preceded me. My reputation had gotten to the school before I had gotten to the school. And that was the situation. And, with us Indians, we have these big functions and our weddings last a week. I mean, the function and the build up to the weddings last a week. I'm not saying that the marriage lasts a week, but the celebrations last a week. And so, if you got to a night before of a wedding and you suddenly saw people picking up their bags, getting the children together and getting the husbands together, you must know that I arrived at that function. And my cousins didn't want their husbands to be with me, and they didn't want the children to see, because I would start off being the live wire of the party, and I'd end up messing up that party. And I didn't want to do these things. I didn't have any intentions. I got ready and I got to that party, and I told myself, when I was teaching, I used to have this battle, and I had this battle every time. When I got up in the morning and I thought about the night before, fights I'd caused in the pub, the arguments that I had, the debates about sport, politics, things which I knew nothing of. And when I got up in the morning and, my mind will tell me that if you drink today, you're going to die. And at 2:30, when the school bell rang, my heart used to tell me, if you don't drink today, you're going to die. And I used to have this battle between my mind and my heart. And my mind would tell me, go there and have 1 beer, or go there and have 2 beers. And I didn't know about this phenomenon of craving, and I wondered how I'd gotten it wrong every day, day after day after day. And I couldn't understand that. By this time, I became the lower companion. People who loved to be with me no longer wanted to be with me. My friends suddenly decided that they didn't want to drink today. And even though they wanted to drink, they wouldn't drink because of me. And, life had become unmanageable. I was in relationships, and, I had girlfriends, but I'd like to refer to them as hostages. They got away as quickly as they could. And even though I wanted to be in these relationships, they weren't powerful enough to stop me from drinking. My dad had joined Alcoholics Anonymous in November of 1989, and in April of 1990, or around that time, he suggested Alcoholics Anonymous to me. And the thing about this illness is that I'm unable to see the spiritual malady of my own spiritual malady. Other people can see it in me. And my dad saw something in my drinking that I couldn't see. And I thought he wanted me to go to Alcoholics Anonymous because their lives were unmanageable because of my drinking. And and so I'd taken a decision to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd stopped drinking about 2 weeks before I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I got to this first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd made a decision that A, will not have anything to do with my sobriety. I didn't want to drink, but I didn't want to be a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the reasons I gave: one, I was too young; two, I was too educated; and three, I thought that there was a stigma attached to me being in Alcoholics Anonymous. And for the next 14 months, these three things, either individually or collectively, conspired to keep me drunk. And I'd come into Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd go to a few meetings, and I think I didn't need this stuff. And I'd go and I'd continue to challenge the devil in his own playground, continue to sit with my friends, pour the drinks for them. And before I know it, I had that first drink. I didn't stick around in Alcoholics Anonymous long enough to know that you don't take the first drink. I didn't stick around long enough to know that you change your playmates, your playgrounds, and your playthings. I didn't know all of these things. And so I succumbed to that first drink. And and then I'd realized, when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I realized that it is easier to stay here than it is to get here. And each time I tried getting back into these meetings, it wasn't that the size of the door had gotten smaller. It was just that my head had gotten so big that my head couldn't fit through these doors. And I had a problem. And it took me 14 months. And it was on the 29th of June 1991 that I had my first day of sobriety again. And this thing about admission, and I've learned that we can admit that we alcoholic, our lives have become unmanageable, etc. But until this admission becomes acceptance, recovery was difficult for me. So what happens in the head has to somehow move into the heart, because it tells me in our literature that we must concede to our innermost self. And this is the first step in recovery, not of recovery. It's the first step in recovery. And so this message from my brain didn't reach my heart, and I couldn't concede to my innermost self. So until I reached a point of admission and acceptance, recovery wasn't going to be possible. So I'd come into Alcoholics Anonymous, and I learned the term white knuckling it, through these online meetings. And I dare not say the name of the platform that we are using, lest we as Alcoholics Anonymous endorse this platform. And I'm very mindful of our traditions, but I learned that, the term white knuckling. And so, but I was just scraping by each day, just making it not to take that first drink, and a sigh of relief when I went to bed, because I knew I was quite safe. And I looked around me, and I saw people that were effortlessly laughing and enjoying life, and they probably came in after I did. And the difference between those people and myself was they had found God, and I haven't as yet found God. And this thing is about acceptance. I had to accept that I couldn't do anything about my illness without a power greater than myself. My powerlessness couldn't be sorted out by me. And so accepting God, and so I'd get down on my knees and I'd ask God. My God didn't have a name. It didn't have a form. I didn't know what this God looked like. I just said, God, please keep me sober. And at the end of the day, it was, thank you, God. And the thing about this is that I heard in the meeting the other day that when you put the plug in the jug, you just cure your drunkenness. It is only when you start to work the steps that you treat your alcoholism. And this illness of alcoholism, progresses even when I'm sober. And I think it progresses more rapidly when I'm not drinking. And so I had to come to accept that I was walking around with untreated alcoholism. And I have a sponsor today, and the best part of that relationship is that he knows he's my sponsor. There were people whom I said were my sponsors before. They didn't even know that they were my sponsors. If there's someone that had good quality sobriety, and I tell people that this is my sponsor. and I'd never used the person. And Alcoholics Anonymous is not a spectator sport. Neither do we recover by association. I giants in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I traveled with giants in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I could never be as sober as them until I did what they did. And standing next to the best person, or the person with best recovery, and driving to a meeting with the person with best recovery doesn't make a sober person. I had to do thing about these things. And the thing about the steps is that I look at my recovery in phases. And the first phase that I of working these steps is a phase of obedience. Got to do it as a sense, because when I obey these steps, then I start to stay sober. And as I continue to do these steps out of obedience, I start to enjoy life a little. And then comes the next phase of walking these steps, which is enthusiasm, because it comes from enjoyment. And finally, the last phase of which I aspire to, and I'm still haven't been there, is the stage of zeal. The effortlessness into which you just work, and you get into the step, and your powerlessness and your character defects, etc. And that's the phase which I strive to get towards. And sometimes I have a good day, and sometimes I don't. But Alcoholics Anonymous is always a work in progress. I will always be a work in progress. And they have terms like spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. And I always use that as a cop-out to justify my bad behavior, as an excuse for my bad behavior. But today, when I look at spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection, it means that I should be getting better every day. And I shouldn't be at the same point. And when I got to the steps, and when I came to believe that a power greater than myself would restore me to sanity, and when I made this decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, I'd realized that, step 3, unless I do step 4, unless it is followed by the action of, only becomes a conversation that I have with God. The action of step 4 verifies this decision that I made. And so after a few years in Alcoholics Anonymous, I took out these pages and I started doing my inventory, and I started writing my inventory. And I was in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm a fairly good guy, so I just printed out a few pages and I went through it. Then I needed a few more, and I needed a few more, and those pages became like 69 pages of inventory. And this is being in Alcoholics Anonymous. And whilst I was doing these, and there were 5 columns on these pages, and in the first 3 columns, I had a field day taking other people's inventory. And in the 4th and the 5th column, then I learned who I was. And you start to see, and in our big book, it tells us, we start to see life from a different angle. And the angle that I started to see life was that I am not the victim anymore. I was the perpetrator. And Father Ed Dowling says that, when someone asked him what's heaven, and he says that heaven is a new pair of glasses. And doing the step 4 for me is a new pair of glasses, because I start to see life differently. And Father Ed said that, if you ever find me in heaven, it is by walking away from hell. And when I started to do the step 4, I started to walk away from hell. Somewhere in our 5th chapter, it tells us that we need to grasp and develop a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. It's not about grasping, it's about developing. And when I start to work these steps, I start to develop a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty, because step 4 is about being honest of who I am and what my part in all the drama of my life has been. And up until this time, I was still not so sure that God was going to remove these bedevilments, because I was confused a little bit about God. I was looking for God as if he was lost. And when I read our literature, it told me that God is deep down within me. And I was looking for him everywhere else except within me. And I realized that when I'd done step 4, I realized what had been blocking me from God. And they were layers that I needed to peel out. And once I got rid of those layers, I got to God, I got to the source, and I was now ready to tap into the source. I was now ready to make that connection. And this was after a 6-hour conversation with my sponsor. Well, and step 5 for me was such, I've overcome my nervousness now. And, my talking at an AA meeting is much like my alcoholism. Once I start, I can't stop. And so, and, but when I started with the step 5 with my sponsor, I was stuttering and I was stammering and I couldn't put 2 words together. And then because I was most vulnerable, I was telling someone else who I am. But you know what? At the end of that 5th step, it was the first time in my life that 3 different entities knew exactly the same thing about me. I knew the same thing, God knew the same thing, and my sponsor knew the same thing. And there was never a time when 3 different people knew exactly the same thing about me. The story always differed as it moved from one person to the other. And there was the first exercise in honesty, and there was the first demonstration of honesty in my life. For the first time, I was being able to be honest to the extent that Alcoholics Anonymous asks of me. And I knew that life was going to get better until my sponsor told me that, you know what, you're going to be stomping for a long time on 6 and 7. And my alcoholism sensed the weakness there. And, whilst I am busy trying to get sober and I'm working with God and I'm trying to work these steps, my alcoholism and my ego and my character defects, they're not gone too far away. They're probably around the corner doing sit-ups and press-ups, just getting ready to get into my life. And at 6 and 7, it sensed the weakness. It sensed that I'm vulnerable and, maybe I'm not too keen on this. And my alcoholism told me, you know what, life sucks. So what's the point? What the hell do you need to get rid of all of these things? And I wanted to prove my sponsor wrong. I didn't want my alcoholism to whip me the way it had been whipping me all of these days. And the extent of my recovery will determine how much my alcoholism whips me. And so, my sponsor called me again and he says, how's it going? And I says, you know what? I am battling on 6 and 7. And he told me a few things. And that's when I realized it's not a pray and wait step. It's a pray and do step. And I wasn't ready for the period of anxiety and the period of unknown. And this is where my God had come into my life. And I had to pray to God to remove the anxiety of the unknown, because I didn't know what a life was to be not to swear a cab driver. I didn't know what life was not to swear the guy that just cut in front of me on the freeway. And so I had to get used to a life without character defects. And this meant a period of withdrawal. And this is where I had to be entirely ready, because I had to ask God to help me to overcome this period of withdrawal, to help me to get through this period of anxiety of not knowing what it is on the other side. I didn't know what life was beyond my character defects. And everything that I really wanted lay on the other side of fear. And I had to ask God to help me overcome those fears. And the beauty of this is that, in the middle section of this program, it gives you a whole step to prepare and then to execute. And in step 7, I had to humbly ask him to remove these defects of character. And then, of course, I made that list and I didn't show it to my sponsor, and he wasn't very thrilled about it. And I realized why I should have showed it to him, because, we're not dealing with a common cold here. We're not dealing with something that a pill can sort out. We're dealing with matters of life and death. I am not here because I drank too much of milk or I have ingrown toenails. I am here because I have a life-threatening illness. I have a fatal illness, and it's called alcoholism. Without help, it is too much for us. And so I had to be so mindful of these things, and I had to listen to my sponsor. I had to have a sponsor that was louder than my head. I had to tell my sponsor, I had to have a sponsor who, and Johnny Kay mentioned that, and he says, my sponsor told me exactly the same thing. When I told him I drank the mortgage money, I took the mortgage money and I spent it on alcohol. He says, you mean to say you stole? And if I told him that I spoke to someone whom I shouldn't have been speaking to, he said, you mean to say you cheated on your wife? And so he pointed out the exact nature of my wrong. He pointed out the exact nature of my wrong. And so, I eventually made the amends. And step 9 for me was like, signing the peace treaty with my past. In step 3, I'd surrendered, but I hadn't surrendered to an enemy that was hostile. I surrendered to an entity whom I knew, God whom I chose, the God of my own understanding. And, along the way, before I just continue with that, talking about my character defects, I found that working the traditions in my life had actually helped me overcome many of my character defects. And instead, I run a business. I'm self-employed, and my character defects can help me maximize my profits in the business that I run. And tradition 7 tells me that we should be self-supporting through our own contributions, and that whatever I do and whatever money that I earn should be out of the efforts of the work and my own talents. I shouldn't be dependent on the talents and the so-called generosity of other people. And so, I'd learned to limit myself to that. I'd learned to understand I had to live within my means, and Edition 7 had allowed me. And when I look back at my worst character defects, my worst character defects were problems of money, property, and prestige. And the step tells me what my problem is, and the tradition tells me what my life is like. And if AA were a song, and when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I'd just be humming the tune because I'm new to this. And when I work the steps, I learn the first verse of that song, and I learn the lyrics, and I start to sing the song. And when I learn the traditions, I learn another verse, and I start to sing the second verse. And so with the concepts. And if each one of us had to teach the other person the song, we would all be singing the same song, the same tune, the same words. And wouldn't Alcoholics Anonymous be a wonderful place? And when I come into Alcoholics Anonymous and I stay away from that first drink, when I take my first step, I move a little away from that first drink, but I'm still within reach of that first drink. And when I work the second step, I move a little away from the drink, but I'm still within reach. And so it is with the third. But as I continue to take those steps, I move further and further away. And by the time I'd gotten to the 12th step, I'm out of reach of that first drink. And if I had to add the traditions and the concepts there, how far away from that first drink would I have gone? And this is what A is about. It is a 3 legacy program. It is not only about recovery. It is about recovery, it is about unity, and it is about service. For me to just come here and recover and do nothing else, I'm still self-centered and selfish. I'm still taking from Alcoholics Anonymous. What do I bring to the table of Alcoholics Anonymous? The 12th step asks of me, the 5th tradition asks of me, the closing lines in our preamble expects of me to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. And when I work, and my hats off to our co-founders, they wrote a book to allow me, Pravesh, to carry this message in a consistent way. I don't want to be the big book that a newcomer reads. I just want to be the person that takes him to the big book. Let him read for himself what's on the line, not what's in between the lines, what's on the lines. I want him to read that. I don't want to be the big book. I just want to be the conduit. Because it tells me that having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, which steps? The previous 11. We tried to carry this message, and it tells me to whom I carried the message. Tradition 5 is embedded in the 12th step. We carry this message to alcoholics, not to anyone else. We carry the message to alcoholics. Tradition 5 is embedded there. Our traditions were developed in 1950 or accepted in 1950. The book was written in 1939, and there's an evidence of tradition 5, our primary purpose, our singleness of purpose. And that's what it tells me whom I should carry it to. There are a number of things that has happened to me as a result of coming into Alcoholics Anonymous. I stopped smoking. Well, that was the only thing that really happened to me. Much of my bad habits are still intact. But whatever it is happens to me outside of Alcoholics Anonymous, I shouldn't bring it into this meeting. I mean, in Alcoholics Anonymous, I shouldn't bring it and expect you people to believe that it's going to work for you. And people that have a problem with understanding this 5th tradition of our singleness of purpose, and I sometimes I can be crude, or I tell it to them, assuming you had a heart attack right now, would you want me to call a cardiologist, or would you want me to call a gynecologist? What is your choice? And it is as simple as that. When it comes to our own lives and our own health and our own well-being, we want the specialist to take care of. We want the best people. When it comes to alcoholism, as alcoholics, we can help another alcoholic. And that's very close to my heart. There were people that had come before us that made sure that Alcoholics Anonymous is in a good space for me to walk in. And what am I going to do in my watch? It is my responsibility to leave it exactly the same or in a better space. And then service in Alcoholics Anonymous, has been the golden handcuff that has kept me close to Alcoholics Anonymous. I have done general service apart from the service at my home group. I have done general service in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've been down that triangle, and service in Alcoholics Anonymous at the principle behind service doesn't get bigger than one alcoholic talking to another. Whether you're talking to the alcoholic directly or indirectly, all we're doing is doing our best to make sure that the message reaches the alcoholic. And service, if being of service in Alcoholics Anonymous meant for me, I couldn't be with my son on his 8th birthday because I had to tell him, Pyash, I'm off to a board meeting away for the weekend and I'm not going to be here. You'd have to have your birthday on your own. Service in Alcoholics Anonymous meant for me that I had to close my business for a period of a week when I had to attend the World Services meeting. I had to go away, and I had to. So service in Alcoholics Anonymous, and if you're not inconvenienced a little when you're doing service, then I don't think you are doing service. Or I say for myself, I don't think I am doing service, because it comes at a price. It comes, but what it is about giving back to what was so freely given to you. It means not being with your family. It means having to explain. And I met my wife when I wasn't drinking. I was in Alcoholics Anonymous and sobriety. And when I introduced myself, I think the second thing that I told her was that I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And a friend in AA remarked that that was the worst pickup line that he had ever heard. But I needed to make sure to tell this person, what is first in my life? What is my primary purpose? I don't want my primary purpose to become my family, my job, and everything else. I'm losing focus. These things are important to me and I don't neglect them. I'm mindful, I might not even put food on the table at some times, and I need to be mindful of the job that I do. But I should not lose track of my primary purpose. I should not get involved in this chase of money, property, and prestige, because it diverts me from our primary purpose. And so I try to keep it as simple and, as possible for me. It might work for someone else, but for Pravesh, the alcoholic, very often people will tell me that, you do a lot on Alcoholics Anonymous and a lot of service. And I tell them, I got to do a lot and a lot of service in Alcoholics Anonymous because I'm more sicker than other people. And I need to do a little more than other people. And so, acceptance and service, as you go deeper down the triangle, the positions get fewer and the bosses get more. And I had to reach that stage of acceptance, but I was grateful. And with service, my 12th tradition tells me that I don't ever make a career or an ambition of Alcoholics Anonymous. I don't have any ambitions in Alcoholics Anonymous. When it comes to service, all I need to do is put up my hand and say, I am available. And God, through the group conscience, will decide whether they need to use me. And God had saw it fit to use me in the various positions. I've had the opportunity of being a regional trustee, the chairperson of the board in South Africa. I've had the opportunity of representing South Africa at 2 World Services meetings, meeting delegates from 55 other countries. And you know what? Their problems are no different from ours. The height of the curb from the road to the pavement is exactly the same in Mexico City as it is in South Africa, as it is in Australia. The fact that our hands get shorter and our pockets get deeper when it comes to the 7th tradition is the same throughout the world. And so we have no different problems. And, coming to the 7th tradition, for me, the 7th tradition is just not by the way. It's part of my preparation of going to the meeting. When I go to a meeting, I know exactly what I need to do as far as my 7th tradition contribution is. So I don't get to the meeting, and when the hat is passed around, then I scramble in my wallet. I look at all the notes that I have, and then I pick up a coin. I know exactly what I'm going to do when it comes to the 7th tradition. And that is my responsibility. And I make the greatest contribution to the 7th tradition at my home group because I know where the money is going to. I know exactly what the money is going to be used to. And if I come to your group and I'm not comfortable with what you're doing with the money, I probably pay for the cup of coffee and nothing more. when I go to a group that I know is contributing to the general service office and to the area and to the district, then I'm more than happy to part with my money. And it's just something that I'm serious about Alcoholics Anonymous. I love you a lot, but I love Alcoholics Anonymous more, and I'm not going to make any bones about that. And that has gotten me into trouble, because I defend Alcoholics Anonymous with my heart and with all the might that I have. And it tells me in the 5th step, there's so many references in the 5th chapter rather that tells me that I do this program with my heart. It's an all or nothing step. It's an all or nothing program. Rigorous honesty, thorough from the very start, complete abandon, and fearless and searching. All of these things tell me that I need to do this program with my heart. And so, if I'm not going to do it that way, it tells me half measures avail us nothing. Half measures don't avail us 50%, and 8 out of 12 steps don't avail us 75%. They avail us nothing. It's only when I do 12 out of 12 do I get the full benefit of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I sponsor people, and I think I saw 1 or 2 of the guys that I sponsor are here on this meeting. And thank you guys from my hometown and my country for being here with me. And they know that I'm a difficult sponsor. I don't mess around. I also tell them that, maybe it's time I move because I don't think I'm bringing any good to you. I'd rather you stay sober than get drunk because of me. And if we can't find common ground, then we got to move, because this is like I said, it's not a common cold. It's a matter of life and death. And I was detracted, or I deviated when I was talking about the 12th step. And finally, the 12th step in Alcoholics Anonymous tells me that, I got to wear this badge of Alcoholics Anonymous with distinction when I practice these principles in all my affairs. And excuse me, the 11th tradition tells me that our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. Sarah, please remind me of the time. And so, our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. So what is it that I have that someone's going to be willing to go to any length to get? What is it? If you want what we have and are willing to go, what is it that Pravesh has that a guy who walks in here for the first time is going to be willing to go to any length? It has to be something of substance. It has to be something different from where he comes from. And so sobriety is not only a requirement, sobriety is a responsibility. Because what do we carry? We carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what is the message of Alcoholics Anonymous? That we have had a spiritual experience. I mean,
5 minutes, Pravesh.
Oh, thank you, Barbara. And the fellowship has so many messages, and I'm not saying that they are incorrect messages, but they tell me stick with the winners and you'll win with the stickers. Stick with a bunch and you won't get peeled. Meeting makers make it. And sometimes I wonder, what do meeting makers make it? Because I've been doing so many meetings. I made nothing until I got to the steps. This fellowship will sustain you, but the steps and the program will change you. The steps and the program will change you. And the name of the game is change. Nothing changes if nothing changes. You can come into Alcoholics Anonymous and you can go to as many meetings as possible. And the good news is that you won't drink. But the bad news is that it's never about the drink. It's never about the drink. It is about an illness called alcoholism, of which drinking is just but one symptom. And so, what do you want to be? Do you want to be happy, joyous, or free, or you just didn't want to drink? That is the question that I had to ask myself. I didn't want to scrape by every day. I didn't want to scrape by every day. I wanted to end the day grateful. And step 10 for me, the orange juice on the floor step, as I like to call it, is that it's a step where when you spill orange juice on the floor, you know exactly what you have to do. You can't let it get messy. You can't let people slip on it. You can't slip on it yourself. So you got to wipe up that orange juice. And step 10 tells me that I stay sober today on what I do today. All of that service that I've done, all of those things that I told you about, was good for then. That's what God needed me to do at that point in time. What is it that I do? I cannot dry today's clothes with yesterday's sunshine. I need today's sunshine to dry today's laundry. And so Step 10 keeps me in the moment. And I love the part about step 10. It tells me that we watch out for resentments, anger, dishonesty. And it uses a word they call when these appear. It doesn't say if it appears, it says when it appears. So it's going to appear. So my defects, until God removes them completely, they never ever removed completely. They just move from my alcoholism side to my recovery side. And they can oscillate between the recovery and the alcoholism side. All it needs is a little bit of weakness and a lack of vigilance on my side, and my character defects come back and start running the show. And step 10 makes me find out about my character defects before you find out about them. And I got to be vigilant. And so, what a beautiful day it is when I go to bed and I retire and I take that inventory and I don't owe anyone an apology. I wasn't dishonest. I don't have to tell someone something that I should be telling them. And I find that those days get better and they get more. And it is because of this vigilance. I can't understand, sometimes I tell my friends, I don't know how one could get bored in AA because there's so much of work to do. I thought that when I did those 69 pages of inventory on the fourth step, it was the end of inventory. It was actually the start of inventory, 24/7, 365 for the rest of my life. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a spectator sport. It is something that I got to do every day. I can't watch others getting sober and expect to be sober. And when I completed my service, I had to accept the fact that I needed to go back to my rooms and set the chairs, make the coffee, put up the slogans, and do all of those things. It does not indemnify me or escalate me to any other level. I just did these things because God needed me to do those things to be sober. And when it's over, I return to being a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I try to stick to the basics so that I don't have to go back to basics. And Alcoholics Anonymous have made a huge investment in me in service, and I need to give them a return on my investment. And that is why I keep coming back to these meetings. I don't want to be the sage on the stage. I'd just rather be the guide on the side. Sitting on the porch on the rocking chair and watching the kids play. They're going to hurt, they're going to fight, and they're going to lose their balance. I can just continue rocking. The only time I would get up from the chair and go onto the street is when they are in danger of getting knocked. And that's the position that I'm trying to aspire to. Sometimes my ego won't allow me. It wants me to be in the middle of things, but it's a work in progress. And so I hope that at some stage I would just be able to sit on the rocking chair and watch the kids play. So I want to thank you for making this a special day in my life. Thank you for allowing me to share part of my life with you. I certainly am not nervous now as I was when I started this meeting. Sarah, thank you for being a wonderful host, and thank you all for listening. May God bless you.
Thank you so much, Pravesh. Let me just stop the recording.